Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. After more than 4 decades of European Union membership for Britain, an important warning leaps into greater significance. Britain is going to look back on Monday, January 1st, 1973, in all probability as a most tragically historic date. A date fraught with ominous potentialities, for that date marked the United Kingdom's entry into the European community. That statement was written in March 1973, and it's classic Herbert Armstrong, gripping, plain, and sincere. More importantly, it's true. Just ask the growing number of Britons grappling with the realization that the European Union has established a major beachhead within British society. For them, it's growing increasingly difficult not to look back on January 1st, 1973, and lament it as a tragically historic date. Today, the ominous potentialities Mr. Armstrong referred to have become alarming realities.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
During a recent trip to Britain, a couple of my friends and associates commented on just how dramatically Britain has changed, even in the last 5 or 10 years. Just last year, the figures of immigrants coming in from the European continent, it's skyrocketed up by about 40%. All total, I think it was over 200,000 people from Europe, a lot of them from Eastern Europe, Poland and other countries like that are just looking for a better life, and they're flooding into British cities. And it is changing the makeup of that country, and it's alarming quite a few Brits. This is a headline from Reuters just a month ago. Spooked by immigration, disgruntled UK voters turn to anti-EU party, the UKIP party, the party that wants independence from Europe, the party that wants more secure borders, the party that wants to reduce these immigration numbers so that Britain can hold on to what little of its heritage it has left. This is from that particular article. It says, such resentment has helped transform UKIP, or the UK Independence Party, which wants Britain to exit the EU and to sharply curb immigration, from a marginal protest party into one poised, it says, poised, say opinion polls, to come second after Labour, or even first in the May elections. Now those elections are today, actually, and the most recent, this was an article from a month ago, but the most recent polls are actually suggesting that UKIP's going to come out on top and have quite a strong representation at the European Parliament. Pretty amazing development. Going back to that article, it says UKIP currently has only 9 seats in the European Parliament and no elected members in the British Parliament, yet it won almost 1 in 4 votes in local elections last year and has also pushed the Conservatives into 3rd place in a string of one-off votes for national parliamentary seats. So, as I said, I mean, what... with these elections going on, even today, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about this at thetrumpet.com in the days ahead as we get the results back starting tomorrow and on through the weekend, to just see how dramatic this change in the public opinion in Britain actually is. I'm sure we'll get a pretty good insight into it once these elections have completed. Here's another recent headline, UKIP closing in on victory. Polls put Farage, that's the head of the party, Nigel Farage, 7 points ahead on day of crucial EU vote. And one little blurb from the article, you can see there it says UKIP are on course for an unprecedented victory in today's European Parliament elections. An unprecedented victory. Here's another headline from today, UKIP set to win European elections. Liberal Dems, it says, or Democrats face wipeout. That's from the Huffington Post. Now, according to one recent poll, about these surging numbers for UKIP, it revealed that the key issues revolved around immigration and EU membership. Immigration and EU membership. Now, I want to take you back to what Mr. Armstrong said. I quoted him at the top of the program from that 1973 Plain Truth. He said, Britain's entry into the European community portends a tragic situation. A tragic situation. And today we're seeing it play out. The amazing thing is, Mr. Armstrong said that 4 decades ago, more than 40 years ago, back when Britain, after it had lost its empire, after it was really losing everything, hitched its future to the continent, to Europe, to Germany. And now it's waking to the fact that that hasn't helped matters at all. It's making things, in many ways, a lot worse. One more short statement. He said, Britain will be faced with a dilemma. Now you have to keep in mind, again, he went on and talked about, in that article, about the fundamentally Protestant Britain attaching itself to a more Catholic-dominated Europe, and how that these two were going to clash, and that either Britain was going to have to abandon its historical roots or abandon Europe. Now, we've talked before, following on those many statements that Mr. Armstrong has made, we've talked before about Britain either leaving or being kicked out of the Union. We don't know all the details on how it's going to happen, but we certainly know it's going to happen. This takes you back even further. This is a quote from 1956. Mr. Armstrong said, the stage is all set. The Germans are coming back from the destruction of World War II in breathtaking manner. Germany is the economic and military heart of Europe. Probably Germany will lead and dominate the coming United States of Europe. But Britain, notice this, Britain, he says, will be no part of it. Britain is not going to be part of this union. Now, can you believe Mr. Armstrong said that? He said that in 1956, long before what we see happening today with the elections. But he said it even before the European community came together. In fact, he was talking about the final resurrection of that Holy Roman Empire, even back during the days of World War II. That takes you back to the 1940s. Mr. Armstrong taught, based upon the prophecies of God, he talked about the resurrection of the imperialist Europe, the union of 10 nations, the prophesied union of 10 kings. And he said how that Britain would be the odd man out. Britain would eventually find itself on the outside, looking in. Now, that's just one of the many statements that Mr. Armstrong made over the years in articles and in books like The United States and Britain in Prophecy. But he talked also just about the demise of Britain, the demise of the empire. He spoke of this, not just Britain, but as you can see from the title there, the United States as well. He talked about this in that book, which went out to more than 6 million households around the world over the course of his 50-year ministry. 6 million copies of this book talking about the prophesied future for the United States and Britain. It's essential reading. If you don't have a copy, we'd love to send you a free copy. We'll talk about another little booklet at the end of the program. But this one's critical. This one really does form the foundation for really understanding all the prophecies of the Bible. You have to know where we're mentioned in prophecy to be able to understand what's ahead. If you go back, though, not just to the U.S. and Britain in prophecy, you go back to those Plain Truth articles. I mentioned the one in 1973, all through the 60s. Mr. Armstrong was talking about all the economic woes of Britain of the collapse of its society morally. He talked a lot about the oncoming racial tension and division. He talked about, as he described it as, the sick man of Europe, which Britain really and truly is. We'll see some prophecies here in just a second about even if it might look glamorous on the outside, particularly in areas like London, if you dig a little bit deeper, you see that there's a lot of sickness on the inside. Here's what he wrote in 1966, the big question: what will it take to wake up the people of Britain? Will it take a terrible economic depression, or will it take national military defeat at the hands of a German-dominated United States of Europe? That's fairly recent history. There's a three-part series coming out on the History Channel just in the next few days about that 30-year period from World War I to World War II, where mankind brought so much destruction on himself. Can it happen again? Well, many prophecies say that it will. Let's go over to Hosea, the book of Hosea, chapter 2. This was written in 790 BC or so, and Israel, the people of Israel, went into captivity about 70 years or so afterward. Now, throughout this book, as this little booklet brings out, this is our booklet on Hosea, I'll talk more about that in a second, you find over and again, Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim is mentioned, and that's the British people. That's the tribe that became the people of Britain many centuries later. And notice what God says about our peoples. This is Hosea 2 and verse 8. It says, "For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal." Of course, you can go into the United States and Britain in prophecy and see all that those promises, those blessings that God said to Abraham would be bestowed on his descendants. And how when you get to Genesis 48 and 49, you see that that was given in particular to the two boys, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim referring to the people of Britain and the British Empire, and Manasseh, of course, being the single great nation, the United States. And Mr. Armstrong ties it together with prophecies in Leviticus about how that those were to be bestowed upon us beginning at or around 1800. And that's when the British Empire really did take off. I mean, the century of the 1800s, it belonged to the British Empire. Let me just give you a quote. This is from a book by Lawrence James, Churchill and Empire. And you can find very similar stats in the United States and Britain in prophecy. But let me just give it to you from another source. This is from Mr. James's book. He says the British Empire, he's just talking about the size and scope of it back in the 1800s and leading into 1900. He says the British Empire was the largest empire. In 1900, the red bits on the world map added up to 1.8 million square miles, which were home to 294 million people. There were over 13 million British colonists, most of whom were first or second generation immigrants who had settled in Canada, Newfoundland, Natal, Cape Colony, Australia, New Zealand. Says the white dominions were the British Empire's greatest success story to date. All had thriving and expanding economies based upon minerals and agriculture. Britain was fed and clothed by the dominions. Since 1885, Canadians had converted 775,000 square miles of prairie into the world's largest wheat field. And by 1900, 4 million Australians shared a continent with 54 million sheep whose fleeces supplied the woolen mills of Yorkshire. It says growth on this scale was a magnet for capital, and British investors poured money into railways, banks, and harbors. The dominions were fiercely loyal, it says, and, of course, also served as a military asset. I mean, what you just saw there in that quote, that's describing the greatest empire in the history of this world. And, I mean, it reached the apex of its power not that long ago. It wasn't that long ago, not when you look at the history of civilization. We're talking just a little more than a century ago. when this empire was right at the peak of its awesome power. And yet look at how small it is today. Look at how much it's lost. And then look at these prophecies. God says, I gave you the corn and the wine and the oil. I multiplied these blessings. But we haven't recognized God as the giver of these blessings, as the one who's bestowed these blessings upon us. Look at verse 9. It says, therefore will I return and take away my corn in the time thereof, and my wine in the season thereof, and I will recover my wool and my flax given to cover her nakedness, it says. And now will I discover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hand. See, no one's going to be able to deliver these people described here in this prophecy as they go on and try to hitch their country to Europe or wherever else. There's prophecies talking about Ephraim reaching out to Germany right here in the book of Hosea. And we've seen that happen, and we'll probably see a little bit more along those lines before, as Mr. Armstrong said, they find themselves on the outside looking in. Skip over to Hosea 4. This is verse 1. It says, hear the word of the Lord, you children of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there's no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. Verse 2 says, by swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood, it says, touches blood. There's just no longer any truth in the land. We've become a violent, immoral society. Who can deny that? All those blessings, all that prosperity, all that power. And we've become a very ungrateful people, selfish, self-absorbed, caught up into all kinds of sins, as are listed off here. Verse 6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you, that you shall be no priest to me, seeing you have forgotten the law of your God. I will also forget your children. I mean, as I discussed on the program yesterday, we've just had an explosion of knowledge. Universities everywhere, young people going to universities by the millions. All of this knowledge, all of this information, all this technology, and yet we've rejected the very knowledge that should serve as the foundation, revelation from God. This is the paradox of our age. Mr. Armstrong often talked about this. All of this knowledge, an explosion of knowledge. Well, I think I have the quote. This is from 1970. All of this knowledge, yet virtually no happiness, just accelerating troubles, problems, evils. It's like being stranded on a raft in mid-ocean. Water everywhere, he said, but not a drop to drink. We've rejected the knowledge that really matters, the knowledge that comes direct from God. And so we pursue all these other things, even as we forget the laws of God. And that's why we have so much unhappiness. That's why we have accelerating evils and troubles like never before. Verse 7, he says, as they were increased, so they sinned against me. Therefore will I change their glory into shame. You see, as they increased, as they grew, as they experienced more blessings and abundance, just like the quote from this book brought out, the biggest empire, the most powerful empire, ruled the 1800s. The 1900s, I mean, that was the century for the United States. But look at the world that we're in today. Look at the curses that are coming upon our peoples, our nations. Down in verse 17, this is Hosea 4, it says, Ephraim is joined to idols. Let them alone, it says. Their drink is sour, and they have committed whoredom. Continually, her rulers, with shame, do love. See, let them alone if that's the way they want to go, God says. Now here again, you've got to go back to the United States and Britain in prophecy to understand these terms, these individuals, and who they are today. I want to give you a short quote here from our Hosea booklet. Reaping The Whirlwind, written by my father, he says, today's spiritual condition in Britain is at an all-time low. God says the people are bonded to their idols. He's commenting on these verses that we read right here. They're bonded to their idols. Britain is totally ensnared with the pleasure of this world. We're ensnared in pleasures, pleasure seeking. That's our God. That's our idol. That's what we pursue after. Chapter 5 here in Hosea, verse 11, it says, Ephraim is oppressed and broken in judgment because he willingly walked after the commandment. That's talking about the commandment of Jeroboam, obviously not God's commandments. He's gone the way of Jeroboam in these latter days. Down in verse 12, it says, Therefore will I be unto Ephraim as a moth, and to the house of Judah as rottenness. See, a moth-eaten garment. We know what that's like. It might look fine on the hanger, but as soon as you pull it off and out of the closet, it just crumbles to bits, or it's filled with holes. That's God's assessment. It looks good on the outside, and a lot can be said similarly to the United States. Still a lot of glamour and glitz, a show of wealth, but look at the way it is when you just peer inside a little bit further. One more quote from this booklet. People only see prosperity, glitter, and glamour. Most people today are only living for the next exciting entertainment. Even though the signs of disaster are there, our nations are refusing to see the moths and worms in our society. There's not much substance left to hold our nations together because of our many sins. There just isn't much substance left to hold everything together. We're rotting on the inside. You see, the people of Britain really need to wake up to what's happening, not just in today's elections, not just in Europe, but in the entire world. Instead of worrying about whether they're going to be in or out of Europe, they need to be thinking about that resurrected empire that's forming just across the channel. On the continent there, Mr. Armstrong talked about that, as well as many other prophecies. And as I noted at the start of this program, in 1973, he said Britain's attempt to enter that union portends a tragic situation. Was he right about that? He warned for decades that Britain ultimately would find itself on the outside of this final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. The reality is undeniable. One other piece of literature I just have to note in passing, he was right. There's an entire chapter in here about what he said regarding Britain and the British Empire. He was certainly right. This little book, though, as I said, it mentions Ephraim 37 times. Well, Hosea's book does. And then this booklet expounds upon Hosea's prophecies. So make sure that you really need all these materials. He was right, the U.S. and Britain in prophecy, and this little one on Hosea. You can see the number there on your screen. If you'd like to call our operators today, we'll send out a free copy of any of this that you request. Free copy, no cost or obligation to you. We want you to have it. We want you to study it. We want you to dig in so that you can see what's coming. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.